the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Ready? Oh, all right. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Joshua Lomo. Josh is one of our own. He graduated from our program with an MS in Sustainability Management in 2019. Wow, 4 years already, huh?
2018.
So 2018? Okay. So he got his BS in Ecosystem Science and Policy from the University of Miami prior to joining Stevens. So Josh is now a Sustainability Project Management Manager on the Environmental Impact Team in Jonathan Rose Companies, which is one of the country's leading owners, developers, and operators of green, affordable, and mixed income communities. Josh joined the company as an intern in 2018 while doing his master's and has been with them ever since. He oversees the environmental impact scope of renovations of affordable housing across the country and also leads the development and design for the country's annual impact report. He helped establish the company's procurement committee, which ensures the company's product purchasing adheres to a high standard of environmental criteria. So today, Josh will talk about making a sustainable impact in real estate, green, affordable housing. Welcome back, Josh. All yours.
Thanks everyone for attending. And yeah, I was mentioning Dibs right before this that I remember doing these in person, but I'm excited that we're doing kind of a hybrid model now, so we can get more people in and, talk about something that I never really got kind of mentioned to me during my time at Stevens or even before that, where it's really this real estate world of sustainability that I think is growing, unique, and how it's where I've kind of dedicated my career so far for the last 5 years. So real quick, and do I have control? Yes. Okay, cool. So just to kick things off real quick, as Dibs mentioned, I did graduate from the University of Miami with an ecosystem science and policy degree back in 2017. And during that time, I also did a few internships, one of which was environmentally focused at Staples, the paper company and notebooks, everything, and where they had, a very small sustainability environmental program working through, their reporting strategy. They're trying to promote green items as much as possible, but it was very limited in terms of my scope. So then when I came to Stevens, kind of walked through the world of where do I want to go, whether it's on the policy side, the consulting side, the tech side. And where I didn't necessarily realize I'd end up is in this real estate side. And so I got this internship, as Dibs mentioned, in the summer of 2018, kind of halfway through my program at Stevens. And then they brought me on full time in 2019 post-graduation as a sustainability analyst. And then 2 years later, I was promoted to a project manager. And that's where I am today. And I've kind of built out a pretty substantial slide deck going over pretty much everything that I touch as an environmental project manager. But then also I want to go into what it even means to be a green kind of to be in green real estate and why affordable housing is kind of a surprisingly a leader in green housing. So first and foremost, I just wanted to kind of lead off with what the Jonathan Rose Company's mission is, and then I'll kind of break down what we do as a company. But as it says here, the Jonathan Rose Company's mission is to create a more environmentally thriving, socially just world through the development, preservation, renovation, and management of green, affordable, and mixed income housing. And then pictured here is one of our not quite yet finished. This is probably taken earlier this summer, but this is a building called Sendero Verde. That's going to be the world's largest multifamily passive house building until someone else I think there are a few others across the country coming up right now, but I think it's a really exciting time for passive house. If you don't necessarily know what that means, it means a very tight enclosure. You're, essentially so small that regular AC units are too big to make sense for passive house. And so basically the intention is to generate as much energy from renewable energy or other strategies or just from conservation as you use. And so kind of a very as independent of a building as you can get from kind of the energy grid. So these are popping up more and more, but what's exciting about Sendero is the fact that it's not only passive house, but it's dedicated to mostly affordable housing with pockets of it also reserved for formerly homeless and others. So it's a great kind of, as you can see in this picture, kind of an entire block with some really amazing amenities in the middle. And yeah, just, up in, I guess it's on like 125th Street around in Harlem. And so it's trying to create a community out there of more sustainable housing. And so thinking about affordable housing in general, I just wanted to kind of set the stage on why this matters. And this will be mostly obvious to, I would hope, most of you, but there is an affordability crisis across the US, across the globe, particularly in major cities. And so here we're talking about how rents are just escalating at an unsustainable pace. We've seen this in New York, we've seen this in DC, we've seen this even out in Denver and California, just becoming impossible for especially younger renters or affordable housing or very low income renters to make it work. And so this number of 20.1 million renter occupied households being deemed as cost burdened has increased by an additional 1 million each year. And it's only getting worse. And what ends up happening, which is a cost burdened household, is essentially what HUD deems to be a, if you're spending 30% or more of your income, of your gross income on housing. And so when that happens, you're obviously, not getting as much food, you're not getting the health care that you need, you're you're not being able to take care of your family in the way that you want to. And so that also leads to you being far more likely for eviction purposes as you try and balance the scope of what your income can maintain. And then so on top of this unsustainable pace of rent growth, we're talking also a lack of supply of housing as buildings also convert from what was once affordable housing to market rate housing, or just we convert housing into office space or vice versa. It's basically we're dealing with a situation where there's as of, I think this is from last year, 7.3 million affordable housing units are deemed to be extremely for low income renters, and there's a shortage of 7.3 million housing units across the nation. And then this also, what a key thing to bring up is that this is disproportionately impacting the BIPOC renters. So Black, Latino, Native, and Alaskan Native households are far more likely to kind of be deemed in this extremely low income renter household bracket as white households. And then, as we've seen even this past summer, in the wake of climate change and extreme weather events, this where people can kind of moderate or of wealth can kind of escape their homes. Most low-income renters can't. And so in situations of fires, in floods, heavy rainfall, you're dealing in a situation where it's quite obvious and that it's all kind of cascading down another. And so the Jonathan Rose Company's approach to this is we kind of have a 3-tiered structure, one being purchasing affordable housing throughout the country and maintaining it as affordable housing and not converting it to market rate. And then sometimes even purchasing that housing and adding more affordable units into that housing. Another side is our kind of ACT rehab portion of our business, where we're going in using LIHTC tax credits to improve the conditions of affordable housing to make sure that they don't become degraded and that they survive for the long hold. And then lastly, as you saw with Sendero, is we're kind of building new supply to support this, or to try and claw back our way from that 7.3 million shortage of affordable units. So our new development ground up construction is a really exciting part of our business. So just as a high level, this is where Jonathan Rose Companies currently has properties. We've invested $4.2 billion in purchasing properties and developing properties across the country. I think we're now actually at 101, 102 properties across multiple private equity funds, with over 17,000 of those units being affordable across 15 states and DC. We're headquartered here in Manhattan in New York City, but we also have an office out in Cleveland and as well in Denver and California, some smaller remote offices. But we're mostly based here. And that's hence why our kind of corporate structure kind of starts from the top here. And just to kind of look at some of our buildings, just to kind of give you a sense of what we're dealing with all sorts of different buildings, from high rises to low rises, to kind of townhome style properties across the country in various markets. So that one's in Denver, this one's in Bay Ridge, New York, Shore Hill, and this one's actually in Newark, New Jersey. And so to kind of break things down a little bit further, these are kind of the pillars of our business. So we have the investment practice group, which really is, as I mentioned, dedicated to looking across at all of the housing market in the United States and really deeming what makes sense for our management, for our ownership. So we're looking for areas that are have plenty of public transportation, have great communities already kind of set up, and or situations where we think there's opportunity to add those. And so that's kind of the first piece. Second piece is that development ground up, where we're doing a lot of that in California right now, doing that in New York, and down in DC as well. And then we also operate our own property management company. So kind of those 100 properties, about 65, 66 of those are managed by Rose Community Management. And those are what we have a heavy kind of, who I work with plenty, and mostly, I'd say, where we're kind of able to very quickly get these initiatives off the ground from the greening side, from the sustainability side, from the social side, and work with our regional managers across the country to kind of get things done. And then the other third of that portfolio is third-party managers, who we also work closely with, but it's just a little bit of a relationship. And then we also have our own in-house design build team. And so so on top of that development side, we also have our construction side. So when we're going in for an acquisition, we typically do plan out a pretty sizable capital expense where we're spending some millions of dollars to renovate and to renovate common spaces, renovate in units, renovate exteriors, both from a greening side, a social side, but also from a just a general upkeep side to kind of, and that's really the first value add that we're doing to the property upon acquisition. And as I mentioned earlier, the ACT Rehab is doing a very similar thing, but kind of with on a timely basis as tax credits become available. And then we also have some subsidiary real estate financial services as part of the company. So starting off from some environmental impact side of things, I guess I should back up a little bit and say, where is this money coming from? We are getting this money to purchase properties and develop properties through impact investors. So these are investors that are both looking to make a return, obviously, on these properties once they're sold, but they're also looking to have an environmental focus, a social focus, which is becoming more and more common in the space and has a lot more compliance and just interest across the board. I'd say there's a lot of, I guess impact investing in general is, you're trying to do everything. You're trying to do a little bit of make that money, but then also have this environmental impact. So we kind of, from the environmental side, we're shooting for these 4 main pillars of climate change goals, we call them. So, I mean, we have the greenhouse gas reductions. We look to reduce those by 20%. We have a water reduction goal of 15%, energy reduction of 20%, and a waste diversion goal of 15%. And these are both for on each individual property, but these are also our goals for an individual fund. So a fund is essentially, it could be 5 properties, it could be 30 properties, it could be somewhere in the middle, it could be bigger. But each one of those has its own impact investors, and we set these goals for each fund and for each property, and we strive for them. And that's kind of what tees my team off in pursuing some of our initiatives. And so speaking of initiatives, these are some of the pillars that we look at. So obviously from the renewable energy side, looking at solar mostly, my big focus over the last year and a half has really been around water conservation. And we'll drill into kind of all the different dashboards and tools that kind of I've come to use on a daily basis to get there. As Dibs mentioned on the, early on in my career here, maybe back in around 2019, 2020, I helped start kind of a procurement committee of sorts where we kind of standardized what materials we were going to be using in our developments as well as our renovations. And so I'll get into that. I also want to talk about a little bit about resilience and what that means. Obviously, that's kind of very top of mind, again, as we've dealt with this year, basically, of very extreme weather events. I'll show you these dashboards that we use to kind of keep track of everything. And then, of course, decarbonization is a significant focus for us, especially as progressive cities like New York, like Denver, in states like California and cities like DC are requiring us to not only reduce our energy use, but to fully electrify and to, you've seen New York's goals around, I think by 2050, being net zero. And so these are the kind of the elements that are pushing us to get there. And so it's both it requires a lot of research and compliance, but it also is bringing a lot of money into this space, which is really, really exciting. And so just, again, backing up for a second, big picture, what we do as a department and as a company, we kind of have this impact management system that we run everything through. From the planning stage, we're really, before we even buy a property, we're performing energy audits. We're looking at resilience mapping. We're looking at flood maps. We're trying to understand what is it going to take to get this property not only to be sustainable and to be around, but what is our scope going to be once we go in and start to renovate. On the implementation side, of course, is actually going in, doing that water conservation, that energy efficiency work, that decarbonization work. And that's when we bring in our construction team to really make those things happen. And all these things are also happening on the social side as well, which we'll get to at the end. But obviously on the environmental impact team, that's where mostly I do my work. And then after implementation, we're monitoring that using all of our tools that I will show you in a bit, where we're bringing in utility bills, where we're bringing in energy and water data in real time to make sure that our initiatives and our practices are working. And to make sure and to be able then to report back to our investors that, hey, this money that we're spending on upgrading these homes is actually making a difference. And then we reevaluate as we go, and if we need to kind of readjust our scope halfway through the ownership of a property, we will. And it kind of goes on a rinse and repeat into kind of a operation standpoint to eventually we sell the property, ideally to another morally righteous affordable housing owner who will do right by the community that we've helped create. So one standard that we've basically is pretty universal across our properties is a green certification called the Enterprise Green Communities. This is put on by Enterprise. Jonathan Rose does sit on the board of Enterprise and helped create this certification. But I think an easy way to look at it is it's, as you can see here in these categories, it's very similar to LEED certification, if you guys are all familiar with that. But this is it's geared towards affordable housing. The issue with LEED sometimes is you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars of just fees that just an affordable housing budget can't support. So Enterprise helps kind of walk the line between still achieving the energy goals and water goals and resident comfort and health goals that LEED does, but kind of focuses on the most bang for your buck initiatives and kind of has a similar point system. But as you can see here, again, going through kind of that integrative design practice that LEED has, which is really about bringing everybody on the team together before you even start your scoping to understand what are the key priorities of your site, what are the key priorities of your residents. And so making sure that everybody from the construction manager to the environmental project manager, from the facility staff are all in the room together talking. Second piece here being around location and neighborhood fabric. So making sure that there is, as I mentioned before, going to be a substantial transportation. There's going to be a community that we're building. We're not just going to be building affordable housing in the middle of a desert or in the middle of where, on a highway next to it. It wouldn't make sense and it's not sustainable. We want to put our properties in places that is going to build community, not just kind of isolate people. And so then again through here, so site improvements, water conservation, energy efficiency all very much speak to themselves. Materials that we're using during construction, during the renovation. The healthy living environment is also a piece that LEED is focused on. More recently, I'd say a lot of other certifications ever since COVID have kind of popped up to really emphasize indoor air quality and just overall resident comfort. And then it does have a piece on operations, maintenance, and resident engagement. And that really stems from, hey, we know you're putting in all this money up front, but are you then just going to walk away? Are you going to then become just like a lot of other affordable housing owners and just kind of turn a blind eye to your residents' needs or to what your project was meant to do? The point with Enterprise is to obviously not do that and have to monitor and reevaluate that continuous process and continuously evolve, because we're not perfect either, but it's from that operation side that's really key. And so, as I mentioned, kind of these are some of those pretty standard measures that we're putting in at almost every property that we're going into or going to do an Enterprise Green Community certification. I'll refer to it as the EGC also throughout, most likely. But this goes into everything around insulation, air sealing, putting in new windows, sometimes putting in a solar PV and battery storage. If there's we want to create a community space that can be kind of cut off from the rest of the building in case of an emergency. Looking at landscaping, indigenous plants, your irrigation system. On the operation side, again, making sure that your mechanical systems are properly tuned and commissioned. We've experienced that again. You can put in a very efficient appliance, you can put in a very efficient HVAC system, and if it's not properly commissioned or tuned, it's not going to do what you want it to do. And so we experience that on kind of on a rolling basis every heating and cooling season. And then wrapping up here, Of course, LED lighting and controls, that's just a blanket, like most utility programs at this point support pretty much at no cost LED lighting installs, just because it makes sense at this point. And I think there are places, I think in New Jersey, where you can no longer even purchase fluorescent bulbs. So it's just LEDs make sense. We know that. And then again, healthy materials, energy efficient refrigerators, range hoods, etc. And then focusing on water with low flow faucets, aerators, shower heads, and toilets. So just as an example, project that we did, this was out in Ontario, California, and this is probably called the Grove, which is an 101 unit senior Section 8 housing, where we did basically everything that I talked about. So using California's LIWIP program, the Low Income Weatherization Program, we were able to get a significant amount of incentive money to put in LEDs, to do low flow water fixtures, to put in extensive air sealing and pipe insulation. And we're seeing those results here, right? So post this retrofit, we saw a 16% reduction in energy use, a 20% reduction in water, and a 15% emissions reduction. And you can see there the retrofit cost itself is kind of like taken out of context, was over 300 grand, but after incentives brought it down to a 50 grand job. And so this is a much smaller example of a retrofit project, but a very directed retrofit that saw great results and is still one that we talk about today. And so I just wanted to quickly show, again, some of these other certifications that are out there other than Enterprise. We've started using Greenpoint Rated, which is a certification program that started in California, but is now expanded across the US. It is different. It's different and the same as Enterprise. It has a lot of the same categories, but it has a little bit of a different take on your energy and water goals. And there was an update to Enterprise Green Communities back in 2020, and that made a lot of our costs far more expensive. And so we started turning to Greenpoint Rated in some cases. But also with EGC 2020 came along the fact that when you get EGC 2020, you also got a well building certification, which is another whole building certification, but it also focuses on a lot more on resident health. There's a category on mindfulness, there's a category on nourishment, that sort of thing. Of course, LEED. We also, where we can't go for the whole building certification, we also do Energy Star certifications, and then Fitwell, which, as you can imagine, is based on looking really at our residents going to live a healthy lifestyle in your building. Okay, so I did want to start kind of getting a little bit in the weeds here with some of the laws that have come up over the past few years that are kind of driving a lot of what we do. So as I mentioned before, you have these local laws in New York City, Local Law 87, Local Law 97, that have these goals in mind to reduce energy. So Local Law 87 was one that was launched, a handful of years ago, that required to benchmark our properties on Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but it also required that we perform these prerequisite measures to get our building's energy significantly lower, energy use significantly lower. And then Local Law 97 came out and is now reaching a point where buildings are starting to be fined for not obliging to Local Law 97, but this is where another set of prerequisite measures are there to kind of continuously reduce our energy use, but also emphasize electrification, decarbonization, to allow New York to meet its carbon goals. And then if you've walked around New York City, you've probably seen these building energy efficiency rating. This comes from Local Law 33. And surprisingly, there was a lot of pushback on this, and unfortunately, a lot of probably like 70%, 80% of buildings in New York have a C or a D grade. But and so do so many of our buildings, but they're trying to push the entire city to a certain standard. And so their thought was, in the same way that you grade restaurants this way, people might consider, oh, maybe I shouldn't live in a D energy grade building. Maybe I should find one that's a B or an A. Whether or not that's working, still up for grabs, but it does, it has to be posted right when you walk into your building. So it's a strategy. In Denver, there's a program now that's, so all these are building and energy performance standards. So Energize Denver is one that is focused on reducing their overall energy use intensity, which is just your, your electric use, your gas use, energy use divided by your square footage. And they have a strict target of a 44 kBTU per square foot goal by 2030. And they have different ratchet. They have cycle 1, which will kick in 2025, cycle 2, which will be 2027, and then the last set of fines in 2030. And they're expensive. And it'll be very interesting to see, we're working right now to make sure that our Denver properties are in a good place. But I can tell you firsthand that a lot of properties are, going to need a lot of money, a lot of help to get their energy use down to the point where Denver wants it and expects it to be by 2030. DC is doing a very similar thing, except for the fact that rather than energy use intensity, they're looking at your Energy Star score. So they basically just want to see your building to have an Energy Star score of 66 or greater. Otherwise, you're in terms of the rules right now, you're good. But that's what kind of makes some of these complicated. Is in New York, you have these prerequisite measures, you have these emissions goals, emissions targets. In Denver, you're just looking at your energy use intensity. In DC, you're looking at your Energy Star score. So everyone is kind of talking a different language and setting different targets, which really requires building owners like us. And part of my job is to really balance all of these different regulations and make sure that we're preparing for them accordingly and building it into our capital expense measures, our business plans each year. And I had one here for California. This is pretty standard now, but across the board, most places are now requiring you to benchmark your energy performance. And eventually those benchmark performances will be used to, just make sure that people are compliant in these programs. So getting into the tools that I use on a daily basis, I'd say, we talked about with all of these programs, tracking energy, tracking emissions, benchmarking. We luckily have a system that is a company called Bright Power that they have a dashboard that we've used for 10 years now, 10 plus years, called Energy Scorecards, which basically takes in all of our utility information, all of our property information, and puts it in. And so we can kind of see where our high performer buildings are, lowest performing buildings are, where our opportunities stand. It also allows us to plug in what's called energy events. So anytime we're going in and putting lighting in, putting low flow fixtures in, we can add it in and just track what happens over time. So this is a dashboard that I'm looking at literally every single day. This is what the dashboard looks like at a single property. So we basically break down energy use into various end uses. So into cooling, heating, electric base load, and then your fossil fuel base load, which is like your domestic hot water for showering, et cetera, and then water. And so we're able to see this on a energy and water use side, as well as from a spending side, because a lot of what my time is spent doing, honestly, is looking at these opportunities. So with these grades you see here, these B's, A's, are ranking this building's end uses against peer buildings. So buildings of a similar size, buildings of a similar age, et cetera, location, and giving us a score. And so in this case, this is actually a newer property. I mean, built in 2011 out in Stamford, Connecticut, but it's doing relatively well. I'd expect that from a new construction. But we see a lot of properties that have D's and C's. And so we go in, and that is how we understand where's the most bang for our buck going to be? Where should we focus our attention and our money? What this also allows us to do is look at our month by month, year by year energy use, water use. And so again, this is what I'm going into on a regular basis, looking at trends. So what you're looking at here is kind of an uptick in water use in 2018, and then kind of a stagnation of that water use in 2019. And then you can see in 2021, we recognized that and we implemented a measure, what I had helped put in, which was called an aquamizer technology, which one of the most common reasons for water waste is toilets leaking. Sometimes you can hear it, but oftentimes it's a very silent water waster. But it's when a toilet flapper basically kind of lies open or becomes degraded. And even when you don't flush it, water will continually run. And so we'll be able to track that in the middle of the night. And so this technology basically goes in, has a weight attached to the flapper, and essentially ensures that no water is leaving that tank unless someone is actually pushing down a lever and flushing the toilet. And you can see that dramatic drop off again. So this project went in probably early September of 2021 and has stayed consistent since. But we can only do so much with utility bills. Those obviously only come in maybe once a month, maybe every 2 months, maybe once a quarter. And so what we've started rolling out across our entire portfolio is a more detailed look at or a detailed technology. So we use this company called Alert Labs. They're based out of Canada, which basically has a sensor that straps onto a water meter and can detect as water moves through the pipes. And so we can get a pretty significant sense of, on an hourly basis and on a minute by minute basis, of what is going on in our buildings. And so this is how I'll go into this dashboard and see that our overnight usage is 100, 200 gallons an hour. And so that's how I pretty much know that, okay, toilets are leaking. If we fix that, we can really, we can help reduce operational costs as well as our water consumption of the property. So you can see here, right as it got to, these red lines here indicate a leak was flagged. And then we went in on September 9th, probably, and then you started to see these results pretty much immediately, which is huge for us. Here's another one that just happened. We installed the aquamizer in this building called 2101 South Michigan in Chicago back in middle of this past August. And you can just see, again, looking at the leaks that were flagged, but also just these, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but basically those dips, that's your nighttime usage. And we were probably seeing about 500 to 600 gallons an hour being used at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Most people are asleep at that time, so your building shouldn't be seeing that much water go through the system. And so when we put in the aquamizer, you can just see how that drastically dropped. You occasionally still have some increases. Maybe someone has like a late night shower, someone's doing laundry at night, but for the most part, it's very consistent that toilets make up about 85%, 80 to 85% of water waste in properties. So, which people are very excited by. And so again, here, this is just that minute by minute usage, and you can see starting looking, this is what's called a water floor. So you're kind of 1 a.m. through 4 a.m., 5 a.m. period. And you can just see this continual usage throughout the night. And then after we put it in, you actually see water usage stop. That's what you want to see. This is the sign of a healthier building than what you saw before. Okay, so that's Alert Labs. So that's what we have in most of our properties across the country. But what's an issue with that is if you only have one water meter at your property, you can only you're only able to if you get a leak detection, you have to check every single unit. Whereas what this company does, called Live Buildings, is they're putting monitors on our risers. So we're looking at East A, East BC. If you have an irrigation meter, you'll see that. You can kind of drill down to your highest water using lines and see, so rather than looking at 100 units for leaks, you're looking at 10, you're looking at 15. However, this is way more costly than Alert Labs. And so we only do this We've done this in New York plenty, but very, very rarely, because as you've seen, again, with some of those examples, for the most part, it's toilets. Unless you have a massive leak in your irrigation line or something. 9 out of 10 times, your toilets are the ones that are leaking, so you don't really necessarily need to get into this riser level. But if you have the money to do it, and a lot of our new developments will have these where you can drill in much more closely. Sometimes you can even drill in at the in-unit level or the end-use level, so you can see if your toilet is actually leaking. You can know that it's unit 100B. So different methods there. So this is just a dashboard showing our smart irrigation system that we've rolled out over the last year or so. So you can kind of actually be targeted and program throughout a property. So this is actually at the Grove, the property that I showed earlier in this presentation, and just we're able to far more clearly limit our water use across the property and be very specific about it. And then just to kind of cap off this kind of water conversation, we have 2 different kind of major examples over the last couple of years of this. So a property called North Hills Apartments, that's out in Maryland. We did a full toilet replacement. We did shower heads, we had kitchen and bath faucets. And basically a year later, we saw a 43% reduction in water use, leading into close to $400,000. I think now it is probably around $450,000, $500,000 in reduction in annual water spend. And then, we're talking tens of millions of gallons of water conserved annually. So this is huge. This is also a huge property. I think it's about 900 units. And then in Kings Villages and out in California, we instead didn't do a full toilet replacement. We just did the leak-resistant toilet flappers, the Aquamizer, and the smart irrigation system. And seeing also, it's a smaller property, but it's seeing significant results as well. I think we're now actually seeing 40% year-over-year reduction in water use and upwards of $65,000 reduction in water spend. So again, the whole point of all this is, the point is to conserve water here, but also what motivates that are these dollar values. And water is one of the easiest ways to save money at these properties that until our ownership did not have these initiatives. So I just want to check on time. Okay. And so moving past water, I just wanted to show another kind of tool that we use. This one's called Runwise. And this allows us to kind of get a look at a building indoor temperature. So without kind of us being there all the time, we have 100 properties. It's if we see a spike in electric, spike in gas, where do we turn necessarily? Do we turn to the community staff? Do we turn to one of these dashboards to try and guess what's happening? Whereas with Runwise, we're able to get a unit by unit look of what indoor temperatures are looking like in the units and common spaces. And this is the building actually. So I think I took this screenshot yesterday or today. But just, this is a building that runs very, very warm. So you're talking about, even though it's like 70, 75 degrees outside, you're seeing some units in the low 80s. And in the wintertime, we were even seeing buildings or units in the high 80s, low 90s. So this is from a energy conservation standpoint, it's helpful, but then also from a resident comfort standpoint, this is really helpful. And this is a solar dashboard that we have called Also Energy. This is for a property out in DC. Again, just kind of another tool that we have in our back pocket to make sure that all of our initiatives are working properly. Okay, so I've talked about water conservation, talked about our dashboards and water monitoring. I do want to now dive into several of these last few initiatives, and then I can kind of wrap up. But first and foremost here, decarbonization, as I mentioned, from a building energy performance standard, this is kind of what all these cities are driving towards, right? And so over the last year and a half or so, we've completed now 9 decarbonization assessments, which are different from your regular energy assessment that you're doing in a building. You're really looking at mechanical systems. You're looking at the actual electrical grid to understand what is possible. And so this is a property out in Chicago called Lake Grove that we're looking to do, we've been basically fully funded over $1 million in incentives to convert one of these buildings, to fully electrify one of these buildings, which would reduce emissions at that building by 28% and reduce energy consumption at that building by 57%. We're going to be electrifying the domestic hot water, the stoves, we'll be doing dryers, and the heating, of course. So, and sorry, actually, I said, yeah, I mean, I think this project is $1 million in incentives, but there's a lot of money that's coming in. I am sure, I would hope that you guys have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA that was passed a year and a half ago or so. And that money is now starting to come in to housing. And there's significant opportunities for us in housing to take advantage of that to decarbonize our buildings. So very exciting. And from a solar side, I was just kind of screenshotting a few of our really exciting solar projects that we've done out in California. The one on the top right is out in New Jersey. And then, of course, the one there, you can see the New York skyline. These projects are complicated. They're not easy. And in all honesty, we don't have a big enough portfolio or roof size portfolio to be attractive to a lot of these programs. You know, your solar PV system is only as good as the surface area that you're putting your solar on. So we're looking into a lot of options, how to, compensate for smaller roof sizes. One of which is going into community solar programs. So out in Denver, they've launched a community solar program, which is basically where residents can sign up to have their energy use or a portion of their energy use stem from a solar PV system that's off-site somewhere else. And by doing this, they actually are able to cut their annual electric bills in half. So this was out in one of our properties, Juanita, Alaska, where we were able to have 72 residents sign up for this program. And again, it's great because they're saving money on their energy bills, but then we're also getting to take credit for that solar use. We're saving energy at the building, and that goes toward that Energize Denver program. And so just, and lastly here, just looking at some of our emissions reporting, we've, this is what you can see in our impact report, which I'll show later on. But this is something that we just track over time, our emissions avoided. This is something that impact investors want to see. And so you can see kind of as the years goes on, as our portfolio grows, the larger impact we have as a firm. And we also break down our overall energy use as a portfolio. Okay, and now I wanted to get into resilience for a little bit and talk about, there's kind of three types of resilience that we mostly focus on. Physical risk being what you first typically think of as resilience. So this is against climate disasters, weather events, et cetera, making sure that we're flood proofing our buildings properly. Social risk is making sure that our communities are trained by, as you can see here, this fire safety trainer, as well as making sure that there's a tight-knit community, that no one feels necessarily isolated in a situation where there might be an emergency that they have to take care of one another. So you kind of want to, we hire these resident service coordinators at our properties to create that bond, create that community that typically, when you think about affordable housing, it's very isolated. And so what we're trying to do here is build something different. And then transitional risk is the risk associated with all those building performance standards that you saw me talk about earlier, like the New York City laws and the Denver laws, making sure that our properties are in a space where we're not going to get fined millions upon millions of dollars when these programs requirements come into play. And one way that we also look at resilience is before we even buy a property, we're using this tool that we've been incorporating in our programming for the last year and a half or so, called MapDash, where we're able to take GIS data and Section 8 GIS data, but then also countless other type of data points. So we're looking at here Section 8 housing across New York City, but then also we're looking at the FEMA flood hazard index and trying to cross-reference to understand, okay, if we were to acquire X property here, here, and here. What is our risk at flood from floods, etc. Over the course of a 50, 100-year floodplain. So just another tool that allows our acquisitions team to be more efficient in our property selection. And these are just to go into social risk, really just making sure that we're providing the tools to our residents and our facilities staff, everything they need to kind of keep our properties running as smoothly as they are. But this is actually when I first started as an intern, these are what I solely worked on, I frequently worked on, which is creating these resident manuals, creating these O&M manuals, and creating these emergency and disaster guides. These are key. After we go in and renovate a property, we'll pass these out and make sure that everyone has an understanding of what's great about the building, but then also what happens if something goes wrong. Right. How am I doing on time, Dibs? Do I have more, Khalid?
You have another 4 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I'll just speed through this piece. I mean, this is really, I mentioned procurement committee that I created back in like 2019, or I helped create really. But the goal of it really was to look at everything that we're putting into our properties and make sure that we're having it not just at a standardized level, but a high level of standard. So we're looking at certain certifications for flooring. We're looking at for paint, for lighting and appliances and plumbing fixtures. And we just have Healthy Building Network is a great resource and tool for that. And sorry, now I'm realizing that I have too many slides. But going in, just lastly here, I wanted to highlight some of the amazing things that our social team does. So I have a counterpart from the environmental side of the social impact team, and they're dedicated day in, day out on making sure that our residents and our staff have exactly what they need to create those communities that we're doing. And so these are kind of the 10 categories of impact that we've kind of deemed to be part of our communities of opportunity programming. And then we've highlighted kind of 3 key areas and focus areas that that everything kind of falls under. So housing stability, health and well-being, financial security. And I mean, to cap things off, I mean, I just wanted to highlight a property. This is out in the Bronx. It's called Thessalonica Court. And it was the first property actually to achieve the new EGC 2020 certification, and alongside getting that well building standard. And so everything that I just mentioned, kind of from working with the residents to understand their needs, looking at resiliency and really focusing in on the physical, social, and transitional risk of the building, and then really making sure that our renovation is focused on healthy building materials. That was the key here. And so you can see, we're still starting to see some of these impact performance metrics come to fruition. But it's been a very successful property for us in kind of both on the environmental side and on the social side. And as I mentioned, we do bring a resident service coordinator into most of our properties wherever we can. I think it's probably one of the most critical things that we can do from a social side, because this is the person that if someone has a problem, someone has concerns, from a physical standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, it's kind of they're there to help bring in these services to our properties to get our residents what they need. And then, as I mentioned, we are doing a 3-year research project on indoor air quality, amongst other elements and metrics, to really make sure that what we're doing is actually having an impact. I think it's one thing to look at our environmental metrics, energy, water, emissions; those are easy to track, but social metrics are a lot harder to gauge. And so that's what this 3-year process is going to hopefully show that, and that it also keeps up, avoids evictions, it keeps residents here longer, it makes them healthier, etc. So, and this is one of those, our indoor air quality sensors. And then just kind of highlighting our impact reports over the years. These are what I'm extremely proud of, and you can find these online, but this was a key initiative for me when I first started. And I think it's really turned into something really great. And that is it. And so I want to thank everyone for your time. And I think there's a little bit of a question Q&A session now, and then we'll do breakout.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have a little bit of Q&A now, but again, like as you know, like Khalid will open a breakout room. If we cannot, obviously, we cannot finish